to be able to be back at Forest Hill. This always is home. Since I was 12, I've enjoyed very much this congregation. Have so many friends here and so many great memories. It's a privilege and a great opportunity to be able to be back with you. Always enjoyed the summer series and being able to participate and to provide perhaps a little bit more on the subjects at hand. The lesson this evening is on let every soul be subject. Let every soul be subject. It's from Romans 13:1. And I believe that most of these lessons are from Romans 13. So I'm going to try my best to step on everybody else's material during the course of the next 40 minutes. Now, whether I try or not, I think I will succeed at that. But we are going to focus upon that expression, let every soul be subject. We're going to begin this evening by looking at the text itself. And then we're going to go from the text to the trust. That is what we expect of our government. And for that matter, what we expect of any government. And then we're going to consider the tests. That is, times where we may say, I'm not going to be subject to them. Then we're going to see the temptations and how we might fight against the governments. Then we're going to see the trials. All right, let's see, I'm already stepping on Brother Mosier's, and I haven't even gotten into point number 1 yet. That we're going to talk about. I'll run through that point. I'll barely touch it. Brother Mosier is they that resist. All right. Well, you can get some ideas from this, Brother Mosier. You might. Then we're going to consider the trials, and I believe that is it's somebody's subject. I forget who it was. Brother Bland's. That's Brother Bland's subject, so I'll be taking some of his material. And the trials, we'll be talking about those who were forced to disobey the government in Scripture. And then we'll consider the truth, what our ultimate responsibility is. So that's where we want to go this evening. We want to begin with the text. We're focusing on 5 words. Let every soul be subject. Those first 5 words of Romans 13:1. So let's notice each of these words individually. The word let. Now in the Greek, this word is built into the verb, which is going to be subject. So let be subject is the verb. From an English grammar standpoint, let is an imperative as it's being used here. It is used as an auxiliary to express a request, proposal, or command, or to convey a warning or threat. Here it is used as a command. Every soul is to be subject to the higher powers. Let. Our second word is every. Rex Turner Sr. wrote, "The well-being of man is dependent upon the active prevalence of a system of constituted authority, whether that constituted authority be a patriarch, chieftain, governor, president, or king. In the absence of a system of constituted authority, every man becomes a law unto himself, and violence and anarchy prevail to the detriment of all people." Let every. The every extends to every single individual, ultimately for the good and the peace of all. Let every, Romans 13:2 will say, "Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation." Notice the first word in verse 2, whosoever. anyone. Let every. Our third word is soul. Let every soul. When we think about the word soul, we think about something more than just the physical part of man. We think about higher things, more serious things. We don't necessarily hear it as much now, but years ago when there would be a great accident, a great tragedy, that would be expressed as such and such number of souls were lost in this accident. Souls. We're not just talking about physical beings. We understand that many governments treat their inhabitants, their citizens, just as pieces of meat. Basically just using their citizens as tools. Well, God understands that man is more than a tool. Man is a soul. This says, let every soul, not let every physical being. Let every soul. Why would soul be used here rather than let every person or let every man? I believe 1 Timothy 2:4 will provide an answer for that. Now, I don't want to spoil things too much. We're going to return to 1 Timothy 2 as we get toward the close of the lesson. But verse 4 says, who will have all men to be saved and to come into the knowledge of the truth. God's interest is salvation. The Christians, and indeed every soul's, being subject to the higher powers, ultimately is a matter of salvation. Let every soul. Proverbs 14:34 expresses it this way: righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. We're talking about obedience, righteousness, disobedience, sin. And that disobedience might be on the part of the citizens. It could also be on the part of the government itself. Righteousness exalteth a nation. Let every soul, our fourth word is be. As we mentioned with reference to let, be is part of the verb. Let be subject. As be, just that word itself, however, we're thinking about a word that means to exist or to live. Let every soul live. Let every soul exist, subject. That's to be our continual state. The word be, according to dictionary.com, is used as a copula to introduce or form interrogative, or notice this, imperative sentences. It's tied here to an imperative, which means we have two let and be items which are making sure that we understand that subject is a necessity. Let be. All right, so let's look at that fifth word now. Let every soul be subject. This word is a present middle imperative word. It's third person, it's singular. But notice the third word that I used there, imperative. This is a command. If we didn't have that understanding already with let and be, the Greek word itself is in this imperative form. Again, it's a necessity. This word is a form of a word which is a combination of a preposition meaning under or below and a verb which means to arrange. So this word literally means to arrange below, or as Strong defines it, to subordinate, reflexively to obey, be under obedience, obedient, put under, subdue unto, be, make, subject to or unto, be, put in subjection to or under, submit self unto. Notice that just about every one of those definitions of strong enforce that idea of under. We put ourselves under the higher powers. And notice they are higher powers. We are under. That makes sense. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. Let every soul subordinate itself or himself. Romans 13:5, just a few verses down. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. Not only thinking about punishment, but thinking about what's right. Some things we do just because they are right. Not because they are fun, not because they are convenient, but because they're right. And that involves every soul's being subject. 1 Peter 2:13, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man. I don't like every ordinance. We're not going to take a show of hands in case there's somebody from the IRS here. But how many people, again, no show of hands, how many people love paying taxes? I don't know that we would have any hands even if we did raise hands there. That's a command, something our government forces us to do. I don't know that, January 1st we're thinking, boy, I can't wait. This year I'm going to get to pay taxes. It's something that we have to do. It's right. And we shouldn't do it because we're afraid of the consequences of not doing it. We should do it because it's right. We'll return to that idea in a few minutes. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man. Notice this, for the Lord's sake. For the Lord's sake. I wonder if that might tie back a little bit to that idea of let every soul. You see, there are things more important than just our physical situations, our physical conditions. Whether it be to the king as supreme, and then we go forward there, we'll notice that later. Titus 3:1. Paul told Titus with regard to the Cretans, put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work. We'll talk about whom it was they were to obey in just a few minutes. But the Cretan government may have been as bad or worse than the Roman government that was over it. Titus was telling the Christians on the island of Crete, be subject. Submit yourselves to those magistrates. Be ready to every good work. Okay, that's the text. Now let's consider very quickly the trust. The trust is that the government will do God's will. That's the trust. And we understand that trust is often broken. The government will do God's will, at least it should. Now, we can look at that from this standpoint. If the government does not do God's will, the government answers to God. I am not the judge of every action which my government takes. But God is the judge. And God shall judge every ruler. In fact, I dare say that those who are rulers are going to have a greater burden to bear because of the opportunities and responsibilities which have been given to them. But the trust is the government will do God's will. Romans 13:3 and 4. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. In other words, if we're doing what's right, we don't need to fear the government. How many places in the world might you fear the government when you do what's right? More and more. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. That's the trust. That the government will be the minister of God, the servant of God for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. He has the right to punish the wicked. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. 1 Peter 2:14, or unto governors as them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of them that do well. All governments ought to see people who are righteous and hold up their hands. All governments ought to see wickedness and assure that it's punished. That's the trust. It's not always one upon which we can rely. What about the test? Or the tests? Sometimes we see our government doing things that we don't like. It may be that there's nothing morally wrong with it. It may be that it doesn't violate the command of God. I just don't like what the government's doing. I wouldn't do it that way, and perhaps it infringes upon some right that I expect that I should have. And believe me, I think that we should have inalienable rights, as the founders recognized, but sometimes we can expect to have rights that maybe we've gotten a little too selfish in some areas. So sometimes the test is we say, I don't like what the government is doing. I don't like what the government is doing. I'm going to read something. I saw it today. All of us are aware, out of our own experience, that it is not easy to be obedient to authority. It appears that there is an innate desire on the part of all of us to be independent and to have our own way. This seems to be an inborn, natural, universal tendency of man. Even our children do not like to be told when to get up, how to dress, what to eat, what to do, and where to go. Any superimposed authority from outside ourselves is likely to be met with resentment. We're going to continue that quote in just a moment. But how many of us really like to be told what to do? We're Americans, most of us. I guess some of us are Indians, but we're Americans. We don't like to be told what to do. We are independent. We are free. We have liberty. Continuing into the next paragraph. There is no more fundamental need among human beings than the need to learn early in life to respect parents, school authorities, elders, employers, government, and other properly constituted sources of authority. The trend of our day is toward rebellion. Examples are easy to cite. There is an increase in juvenile delinquency, in hoodlumism, and in racial disturbances. We read the statistics of an ever-increasing crime rate. Assassination is a prominent threat to our leaders. Revolutions rock one nation after another around the world. Altogether, there is a general spirit of rebellion and lawlessness. It is like a disease, an epidemic spreading across the world. Do we agree with that? Yeah, I believe so. We watch the news. We hear the talk around the proverbial water fountain. Continuing, we see this spirit in connection with government as we witness marching mobs in the streets. We are shocked when men advocate, if it is a good law, I will obey it. If it is a bad law, I will disobey it. Such people set themselves on the judgment seat to determine what is good and bad and take vigorous action as they think best. This is indeed questionable, for the judgment of any individual may so easily be warped by his own desires and his own experiences, but even more, It is dangerous not only for an individual, but for a nation. If everyone in the country decided each time the law pinched whether it was a good law or a bad law, we would have anarchy and chaos. Wow, that's pretty good. When was that written? I told you I read it today. It wasn't written today. That was written by Batsell Barrett Baxter in 1977. History has a way of repeating itself. And if we were to turn the news on in 1977, it wouldn't look all that different from the news in 2024. It may be because the God of this world, He's pretty effective. And His effectiveness sometimes causes us to say, if it's a good law, I'll obey it. But if I don't like it, forget it. That's a test. 1 Peter 2:13 says, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake. We can't pick and choose which of the laws of the land we're going to follow. Submit yourselves to every ordinance. Romans 13 verses 6 and 7. For this cause pay ye tribute also. What is tribute? Tribute is taxes. Paul said, pay taxes. But I don't like paying taxes. We talked about that a few moments ago. I don't know that any of us woke up today and thought, hey, I'll get to pay sales tax. What am I going to buy so I can pay sales tax? We don't look forward to paying our taxes. For this cause pay ye tribute also. For they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. In Matthew 17:24 through 27, Jesus and His disciples were in Capernaum. Those who received or collected the taxes, received the tribute money, came to Peter. Doth not your master pay tribute? Peter said, yes. Jesus said to him, what thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children or of strangers? Peter saith unto him, of strangers. Jesus saith unto him, then are the children free? Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them. Offend whom? Offend those who are representing the civil government. Go thou to the sea, cast an hook, take up the fish that first cometh up, and when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. Take that and give unto them for me and thee. 5 chapters over, Matthew 22, verses 15 to 21. The Pharisees, always wanting to trap Jesus, are trying to figure out what they can do to put Him in the horns of a dilemma. They sent out to Him their disciples with the Herodians. Okay, the Herodians are the ones who are pro-government, pro-Rome, saying, Master, we know that Thou art true and teachest the way of God. Teach us the way of God in truth. Neither carest Thou for any man. Oh, they're buttering Him up. For Thou regardest not the person of men. Tell us, therefore, what thinkest Thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. And they brought unto Him a penny. And He saith unto them, whose is this image and superscription? They say unto Him, Caesar's. Then said He unto them, render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Pay the taxes. The test is, I don't want to. Am I subject? Am I under that higher power? Wayne Jackson wrote, "The saints in Rome were obliged to pay tribute, but they were not accountable for the support of idolatry funded from Rome's treasury." Sometimes we say, I don't want to pay such and such taxes because of what the government does with the money. Because the government funds homosexual agenda, or the government funds abortion, or the government funds this or that. Rome was pretty wicked. Wayne Jackson continued, "So similarly, paying justly owed taxes does not imply that we endorse every use of that tax money." Okay, let's just pay the taxes. Now that's just one example. So we say, well, I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do... We submit ourselves. We subject ourselves. We order ourselves below. Another thing that we like to say is the rulers are wicked. I don't know if that's true in our generation. It's true in our generation. Our rulers are absolutely wicked on just about every level. But we have terrible, terrible people in charge. That does not excuse our not being subject to them. Let every soul be subject to the higher powers. When Paul is writing that to the Romans, who are the higher powers? The Roman Caesars. I would encourage you sometime to read Suetonius' 12 Caesars. As you're reading it, every so often you're going to have to wash your ears out with soap. There are some terrible things which those Caesars did. And Suetonius, depending on the translation, Suetonius doesn't pull any punches. Sometimes the translator will, and he'll skip a section or two, and rightly so. The Roman Caesars were despotic, Gaius Caligula. They were anti-theistic, Tiberius. They were frivolous, Gaius Caligula, Nero. They were perverse, Tiberius. They were licentious, Tiberius, Nero. They were incestuous, Gaius Caligula. They were bisexual, Nero. They were abusive, Tiberius and Nero. They were obscene, Tiberius, Gaius Caligula. They were torturing, Tiberius, Gaius Caligula, Claudius. They were cruel and cold-blooded, Tiberius. And they were murderous, Tiberius, Gaius Caligula, Nero, Domitian. And those are just the sections that I've read. I may have skipped over some parts here and there. Government's wicked. Okay? Subject yourself. What are the temptations? The temptations are because I don't want to obey, or because the government is wicked, or because I perceive some command that I don't deem right. Remember what Brother Baxter said, to have civil disobedience or to have protests. Those are the temptations. Quoting from Wayne Jackson, he said, "No Christian can be required to obey a law that violates the higher law of God. The apostles of Jesus refused government demands to cease preaching Christ. Acts 4:18-20, Acts 5:28 and 29. Christian women in China must not yield to government requirements to abort their children. A gospel missionary may ignore regulations prohibiting the distribution of the Scriptures. A Christian teacher must never submit to a state requirement that he or she teach the dogma of evolution as scientific fact." Civil disobedience, we might call those civil disobedience, but those are actually divine obedience. Civil disobedience would be, well, I don't like that, so I'm not going to obey it. In a sense that would be wrong. Wayne Jackson asked, can Christians participate in riots under the banner of civil disobedience to protest what they perceive as societal injustices? Though some so contend, he said, I do not believe that these types of law violations are to be engaged in by the children of God. A Christian must break the law when it requires an act of personal wrongdoing. But we should work to change what we consider to be unjust laws by exerting influence in legal ways, most especially in the alteration of people's hearts and their convictions. 2 Corinthians 10, 3-6. Christian people do not bomb abortion clinics or assassinate abortion doctors. They do not chain themselves together to block doorways or lay down in the streets to bring traffic to a standstill. He continued, and this is the real place we need to focus. There were many injustices in the first century Roman society. For example, slavery, gladiatorial games, etc. But there is not a trace of evidence that the Lord's people did anything other than teach to remedy such situations. That's what we need to do. We need to practice not only the Great Commission, but we need to practice Matthew 5:16, being light so other people can glorify God. The temptation, though, is to fight against the system. The trial. What if what the government does violates the will of God? Then we must do the will of God. We don't have time. I don't know what time I'm supposed to finish, but I assume it's getting close. We don't have time to look at Daniel 3 and Daniel 6 in detail, but most of us are familiar with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah and their refusal to worship the great image of the king, and they're being thrown into the fiery furnace. The king was against them. Jesus Christ was with them. If he's the second person, if that's the second person of the Godhead that was in the fiery furnace, and I believe it was. Daniel chapter 6, verses 3-16. Daniel continued praying even though it had been outlawed. Interestingly, the king was with him. The king wanted for Daniel to do well. Acts 4:18 and 19. The Jews told Peter and John not to teach in the name of Jesus. Peter and John answered and said unto them, whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto God, judge ye. Acts 5:27-29. When they had brought them, they set them before the council, and the high priest asked them, saying, did not we straitly command you that ye should not teach in this name? And behold, ye have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine, and intend to bring this man's blood upon us. Then Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than man. We were talking about taxes a few minutes ago. Did Jesus pay taxes? Yes. Luke 23, 1 and 2. And the whole multitude of them arose and led him unto Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, we found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ a king. They lied. If we're doing what's right, people will lie about us too. That's just part of the trial. Brother Baxter wrote, the only exception to obedience to government is when the laws of men conflict with the laws of God. On such occasions, we have clear precedent that Christians must obey God rather than men. But then he continued, even in following this principle, however, let us be very sure that the laws of men are really in conflict with the laws of God. It must not be an imagined or strained interpretation. We're to be subject. Let every soul be subject. Wayne Jackson gave 3 principles No government has the right to prohibit that which is right. No government has the right to authorize what is wrong. No government has the right to force the Christian to violate a divine command or biblical principle. Those are the three principles. That's excellent. And those are ones that we need to appreciate as we strive to subject ourselves to the higher powers. Now, let's close in these last couple of minutes with the truth. Baxter also said, "The Christian is an obedient citizen wherever he lives and under whatever form of government he may find himself." We're obedient citizens, period, if we are Christians. 1 Timothy 2, 1 through 4. Paul said, "I exhort therefore that first of all supplications, prayers, intercessions, giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. For this is good and acceptable in the sight of God, our Savior." And we go back to verse 4 that we noticed earlier. "Who will have all men to be saved and to come into the knowledge of the truth." Who is all men? All men means God even wants the Caesars to be saved. God even wants our rulers to be saved. Let's be subject to them. And let's be the example for others of what a good citizen is. Finally, 1 Peter 2:17. Honor all. Men is italicized. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the king. Let every soul be subject. Thank you so much for your kind attention.